In this interview, I meet up with Gina Riley. She is an educational psychologist and clinical professor and program coordinator of the Adolescent Special Education Program. She is a seasoned academic with almost 20 years of teaching, research, and supervisory experience within the field of special education, psychology, school psychology, and mental health counseling. For the past 18 years, Dr. Riley's research has centered on topics relating to homeschooling, unschooling, intrinsic motivation, and self determination. This is an interest stemmed in part from unschooling her own child from birth through grade 12. Let's welcome Gina. Thank you so much for coming in today. I appreciate your time. Thank
Thank
you so
you
much.
so much. It's such a joy to be here.
Thank you. Thank you. So I want to start off by, in the recent month, in print and visual media surrounding the homeschooling and unschooling have increased tremendously, right? As a researcher, what do you see is missing in these prints?
Yeah. So, I mean, COVID-19 has brought so many homeschoolers to the table,
Mhm.
whether, most by not choice. Nobody had a choice. They just, all of a sudden ended up doing school at home, and families ended up doing school at home. And so that's been a huge shift. What I do call it is I don't call it true homeschooling. I don't want people to get confused by what they're doing now and, if that looks like homeschooling, because it really isn't. What people are doing now is emergency home learning. A lot of
Mhm.
them are following the curriculum of their schools and following other things. So like emergency home learning is very, very different from homeschooling.
Yes.
Also within the homeschooling realm, Elizabeth Bartholet of Harvard University wrote a scathing article on homeschooled children's rights. And it was really, it was like a shock in the heart to the homeschool community, and
Mhm.
something that we haven't heard for a long time. I mean, generally, this is the time when homeschooling has become more accepted. And
Mhm.
Bartholet's article kind of put us back a couple of years when people were scared to home educate because of its ramifications.
Mhm.
Um, in the meantime, you've also had you've had a shift from a lot of people homeschooling. You've had Barthlett's article, which was, I think, a surprise to everyone in the home education community. And then you've had home outcomes research, which has really been consistent throughout.
Mhm.
There are such positive outcomes with regard to academic outcomes and social outcomes and civic outcomes and emotional outcomes. So you've got all that going on. It's a very interesting time for the home ed
Mhm.
community.
Yeah, it is. It is. So, what part of that was like kind of wrong? Like, what are they saying that is wrong in it? That.
Yeah, so Bartholet has come out and said that, homeschooling is a way for kids to be shielded. And so
Mhm.
when kids are shielded or isolated, or when there's communities that are isolated, there are a whole bunch of issues inherent throughout. One of the issues she brought up was the hiding of abuse. And one of the issues she brought up were, the women having to be home and therefore not being able to make money. So she brought up a lot of things, again, that are nothing like the real homeschooling community and what homeschooling is all about. But it did bring us back. Again, it brought us back a couple of years because, homeschooling has only been legal in all the United States since 1993.
Mhm.
I started homeschooling my son, he was 5 in 2001. And
Mhm.
at that time, I mean, when you did it and you made that choice to homeschool, there was a lot of fear surrounding it because no one else did it. We were the
Mhm.
only person in our neighborhood, the only person in our community that chose to homeschool. And so, like, when there's unknown, people have fear surrounding the unknown. So I think that, again, the home education community itself has grown by leaps and bounds. And
Yeah.
what you're seeing in the Bartholet article, I mean, it's interesting that it came up. I wonder what her thought process was.
Mhm. And you say homeschool, but it's unschooling that you've done with your, like, there's a difference, right? Between
Yes,
the,
so there's a difference. So my research has focused on both homeschooling and unschooling.
yeah.
The difference is that unschooling is home education without a curriculum. So
Mm,
kids are learning through life. Kids are learning through mentors and people in their communities and things that you do at home. There are no tests. There are no quantitative measures of progress. It's
mm,
really just learning through one's intrinsic interests and strengths. So my
mm.
research line, yes, I've done research on homeschooling, but it specifically focuses on unschooling and those who learn without curriculum. And I tend to do a lot of that bigger research with Peter Gray.
Nice. One of the reason why I started the summit is because a lot of parents are, thinking about homeschooling. But when it comes to unschooling, there's this fear about, do I just let them do whatever they want? Like, I mean, how does that work, right? For me, like, when we haven't done it or researched like you have, to
Yeah.
me, it seems like I'm just going to let my son do whatever he wants.
Yeah, there's a lot of fear in that, right? We have to deschool ourselves and we have to deschool our minds. Yeah, I mean, a lot of unschooling is letting your kid do whatever they want. And it's more than that. I tend to
Yeah.
focus on like the self-determination and intrinsic motivation inherent in unschoolers. And so when I talk about unschooling, I'm talking about, yeah, you're letting kids do what they want, and what they want is an intrinsic interest. And intrinsic motivation is really, really important in life. So
Mhm.
imagine like spending your days, and I think Sandra Dodd says this so well, right? Imagine spending your days like every day is a Saturday, like you get to do what you love all
Mhm.
the time. And imagine what that brings to you, what that
Mhm.
brings to you intellectually and socially and emotionally. You're much more happy and you're much more interested in what you're doing. So it's not like, oh, I have to do my history work. There's no, ugh. There's like, oh my gosh, I'm so excited. I get to study this, right? Or I get to work with things all day that I love. So there's this intrinsic motivation and intrinsic interest inherent in unschooling. And that's really what got me very much started with it in the first place.
Mm, So parents who are thinking that, because we come from such a traditional school, tests and papers are like, that's the way our parents, told us education was. So it's kind of a shift in our own mind to not to get, if you start this process, you can become like, oh, what are you doing? Why aren't you doing your work?
Yes,
Right?
yeah, I mean, it's called deschooling. We have an actual like term for it, right? And there's not only deschooling in the kids, because sometimes that's a huge shift for kids too, to be able to, do anything they want. Sometimes they were like, well, I don't know what I want. Like I have no idea what I want to do, right? So we need to give kids time if there's a shift from school to unschool. And we also need to give parents time to really deschool their mind, right? Because if you're used to a place where your life is surrounded by the school schedule and your kid come home and the kid does homework and all of that, that doesn't happen in unschooling.
Yeah.
There's no tests, there's no measures, right? So you really have to embrace a child's natural learning capabilities, and that becomes a huge shift.
Mm. So if I do decide and I start deschooling, how long does that process kind of go for? Like, is that dependent on the child and me as
Yeah,
a parent?
and it depends on the child and you. It depends on what the situation was. So, has the child moved from school to a very formal school structure to unschooling? Generally, what happens is there's a gradual shift. So, what happens is that maybe a child comes out of mainstream schooling, starts homeschooling, and then the parent maybe encounters some resistance from homeschooling. And it's the same resistance you're going to get, like, I don't want to do this subject, I don't want to do this topic. And then it causes friction between the parents. And sometimes that, like, okay, let's see this, let's stop and let's re-examine why we became homeschoolers in the first place. Why did we bring our children home in the first place? Was it so that they'd have greater imagination and curiosity and love for learning? And if that's the case, then the shift to unschooling happens rather naturally, because you see your kid. I mean, it's so interesting when you talk to unschooling parents, they'll constantly talk about the fact that they see their kids every day, like exploring. It's not hard because their kids are natural explorers. Um, One unschooling parent, Akila Richards, I always remember her story of her child who really loves learning about languages and culture
Mhm.
and flags. So she starts with like, oh, that's an interesting flag, and looking it up, and then getting into this rabbit hole of, okay, here's the flag. What country is it? And what language do they speak? And what is
Mhm.
the country like? And what is the culture like? And what, so you get into this rabbit hole, which is a really wonderful rabbit hole to get into when you're intrinsically curious.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Yeah, yeah. It just have to a lot of parents, who are coming out from COVID thinking about this. It's a very quick shift, right? They're not having a lot of time like another parent would have or seen, right? It's almost like, not just their curiosity that's leading them to homeschool or unschool. It's more like the pressure of what's happening in our environment, right?
Mhm.
So how's that going to play, do you think, in parents?
I think it's too soon to tell right now, right?
Mm-hmm.
I keep telling everyone we are in an emergency situation right now. There's a lot of social emotional pressure, there's a lot of stress physically, mentally. And so it's hard to tell whether more parents are going to choose authentic homeschooling or unschooling, although a lot of patterns show that people might not be sending their kids to school as readily as they would have, right, if everything went back to normal. So I think it's too soon to tell regarding COVID-19's effect on home education or unschooling. But I do think, I mean, you're getting reports of some children and teens and parents really liking the situation, really liking their kids home with them. Their
Mm-hmm.
relationships are better, their freedom of schedule has been, unencumbered and is more free. So it's my hope always, right? I think everything is a choice. So school is a choice, and I love and support public and private schooling, and homeschooling and unschooling is a choice. So it's my hope that more people just see the myriad of choices available to them and then do what's best for their families.
Mm-hmm. And when parents do choose, let's say, I kind of feel like, what's happening in the outer world is not my liking as a parent, right? For my son to be exposed to, or the virus, it's a scary thing, right? So if I choose, and then later, like a couple of years later, I kind of feel like I kind of went into it with different reasons. Now I see the world differently, right? It's positive now in a way. I want to send. Do I feel like I've done some disservice to my kid, like sending him back again to traditional? Because I just feel like some parents are not maybe doing it for the reasons that other parents in the past have done.
Yeah, no, it's true. And I think, again, anytime you're going from one environment to another, it's a transition. And we should expect the transition. And we should care for our children and teens during that transition. For some kids transitioning back to school, it's easy peasy. They want to go back to school. They know the deal, they know how it's going to work, and it's going to be real smooth. And for others, it might be a little rocky because there's different expectations. But there are tons of stories of homeschoolers and unschoolers who transition back to high school or junior high or wherever they want to transition back to, and do so really successfully, and
Mhm.
do so with the wisdom that they know what intrinsically motivated learning feels like. And so they want to then bring that to the traditional school structure as well.
Yeah, that would be very perfect, right? If that.
Yeah, right. I mean, if we could combine the two structures, right? Like,
Sure,
so
that's
the
perfect world.
benefit of unschooling is that you get all that wonderful self-directed, intrinsically motivated learning. And
Yeah.
in public schooling, there's more of a structure, right? And so if we could take that intrinsic motivation, that intrinsically motivated learning, and bring it into the public school structure, I mean, that's the secret. Like, that's where the change needs to happen. And so that's one of my hopes, that always is one of my hopes.
Yeah, mine as well as an
Yeah,
educator.
yeah.
It would be so much easier for everybody. Even the kids will love it, love
Oh,
it.
I mean, there's so many amazing stories too. There is if you've ever read the book Beyond Measure, you know, there are stories of schools who have transformed into a more intrinsically motivated structure, like Monument Mountain High School, Great Barrington High School, the Independent Project. And so to see those in motion, it's incredible.
Yeah, yeah, perfect. You know, if that does happen, you know, you can see the kids, you know, right now, you know, we all say, how do I motivate my child to learn, right? That's one
Yeah,
of the
that's
biggest
the
things. Even
question.
as a coach, we have to figure out, or a tutor, you know, or a teacher, right? Anyone working with them, you know, they're always like, how do I motivate this child? And it's, as you say, it's, if it's not internally, if you just pushing and pulling, it's not gonna work. It
It's
doesn't work.
not real motivation, right? So we can give as many extrinsic motivators, and we do it a lot in public and private schooling. We give stickers and stars and grades, and those are all extrinsic motivators. And what we know about extrinsic motivation is that extrinsic motivators work, and they're very short term, so they work for the year, the semester, the week, right? What you see with intrinsic motivation is a more long lasting motivation, and there are ways to facilitate it. I mean, I personally study self-determination theory,
Mm-hmm.
which is Edward Deci and Richard Ryan, and they posit that, you know, the ways in which you can facilitate intrinsic motivation in someone are easily accessible. They talk about their cognitive evaluation theory and the three tenets of facilitating intrinsic motivation. And it surfaces on like having kids build a sense of competence,
Mm-hmm.
having kids have a sense of autonomy, and having kids feel a sense of relatedness.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, we can take those apart, right, if you want to. But those are really the three keys to facilitating intrinsic motivation in someone.
Yeah. And can a parent foster that like early on?
100%, right? So
Yeah.
the ways you foster competence or a sense of competence in your child is to really identify and look for a child's interests and strengths.
Mm-hmm.
And really, I mean, notice them and verbalize them and be really specific when you're giving praise to your child. It's not just good job, right? Be really specific regarding what they did. Like, oh my gosh, my son plays guitar and I love watching his fingers just like on that fretboard. And I'm constantly amazed at how fast your fingers can move on that fretboard or how wide your fingers can stretch. So it's
Mm-hmm.
all about really noticing the specifics and the strengths and interests of your child. And then for autonomy, you know, teachers kind of cringe. I think everybody kind of cringes when they hear the word autonomy because they're afraid of it. But it's really just giving your child a sense of choice, giving your teen a sense of choice,
Mm-hmm.
giving them freedom to choose. And for those of us who are more fearful of autonomy, we can start with the small things. Do you want this or this for dinner, right? Would you prefer, you know, to use a pencil or pen when you're doing math? Would you prefer to use graph paper or lined paper?
Yeah.
Giving them those small choices helps build us up to big choices. And in
Mm-hmm.
a school-based world, that can look like choice homework or choice textbooks or choice assignments. And
Mm-hmm.
then going to the other end in an unschooling world, it's choice of your day. Like, what do you want your day to look like
Yeah.
today? And then the last part I think is most important. The last way to facilitate intrinsic motivation in children and teens is to give them a sense of relatedness. And
Mm-hmm.
relatedness is really saying, you know, I have your back no matter what. So
Yeah.
whether you make mistakes or not, whether you do good or not, I have your back. Um,
Mm-hmm.
when your child or teen or the kid you're working with in tutoring or your student feels that kind of love and acceptance, it's much easier for them to take risks. It's
Mm-hmm.
much easier for them to, you know, think, oh my gosh, I have all these choices and I can make a good one, right? I have the support of my parent or my teacher or my tutor, and I can really do good here.
Mm,
So, I mean, it's all, again, it's really easy to facilitate intrinsic motivation, but some of the tenets, again, it's hard to give your child autonomy sometimes. It's hard to give your child relatedness, especially when they're making a choice that you might not want them to make, right? But
mm.
it's also important that they know that that's part of learning and growing.
Yeah, 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 beautiful. When I used to be a teacher and a tutor, those were things that I found to be missing. Like I kept saying, I want to motivate them and motivate them. As I turned it into a coaching process where I'm working with them, I say we're a team. It's like a sports coach says, I got your back, right? Let's tweak up
Yes.
your thing, right? And then they start performing in a different way, like, and they become a team with you, right?
It's
Otherwise it's just like you're teaching and they're lower than you. Now we're just like, let's how do we figure this out to make it better?
Oh,
Yeah,
beautiful. It's like that difference between like a teacher, the one up, one
yeah,
down
um,
relationship, and then a coach or a facilitator, which is equal.
yeah,
So beautiful. That's exactly what it
yeah.
is.
And I even go a little lower and even let them sometimes be
Yeah.
ahead of me,
Yes, yes.
just to build that confidence in them instant. You know what I mean? Like it just makes a huge difference when I give them that position and let them, teach or say something different, right?
That is so true.
Yeah.
That's so true and
Like
amazing.
one of my students that I do my online classes, and I rotate between, if it's in a group setting I rotate, right? So I leave her in one of the room that I was working in online, and with some timetable. She was younger, right? So I left her with some timetable to write it out on the thing, right? And I come back and she was asking Siri how to do 9 times 9. She was
I'm
getting help.
telling you, love it independently.
She figured
Yeah.
it out. Like, why do I have to use a calculator? I don't even have to type. I'll just ask Siri.
And
She'll tell me.
that's brilliant, right?
It was. It was. I was like, I just learned something crazy. I would have never thought about that myself because, I just know the old way of memorize, right?
Yeah.
Or something. And then I told her, you know what? That is brilliant. Like she got all like almost scared that she was cheating. She thought she was cheating, right? So she was like, oh well, I said, no, no, it's actually beautiful. Like you just taught me something special, right? Like it's amazing. And then I said, you're seeing it, you're hearing it, you're saying it, you're doing it all the way. What a better way can you memorize that times table if you want to know
I,
or learn it?
I mean, that's the strength, right? Like when
Yeah.
kids are intrinsically motivated to do something,
Yeah.
they're learning how to learn. And
Mm,
that's really the key. That's what we see
mm,
in people who are more self-directed and they're learning, that they really know how to learn and they take those risks, right? Like, okay, I'm going to go and ask Siri because they feel free to take those risks, right? And the fact that you responded in a way that said, this is
she
brilliant, right? Like that's relatedness at its highest form.
yeah, she was very shocked that I wasn't getting mad.
Yeah, I love that. I love that.
Like it was
I
the opposite reaction.
love that story. That's
Yeah.
the best.
Now I tell all my students, if you don't something, ask. Like,
Yeah, ask. Yeah,
go
ask
ahead.
anyone, right? Ask Siri. Yeah.
Yeah, it's beautiful. And one of the things that happen with us think like parents who are coming into homeschooling or unschooling is like, what if my child wants to go into university or college, you know like if it's unschooling, there's no testing being done. How are they going to accept them?
Yeah, so I mean, we asked that question. So Peter Gray and I asked that question in 2015. We did an initial study in 2013 of 232 unschooling families, and we're like, wow, this is like everything was like a real benefit, and there were challenges, of course, but it seemed so wonderful. So what we wanted to do is really ask the adults who had been unschooled, right? Like, what was your experience like? And amazingly, I think 72 out of the 75 reported an incredible experience, reported so many benefits of unschooling. We asked them about how they got into college, and the results were, there's not just one way to get into college.
Mm.
So everyone always thinks there's one path. You take the standardized test, you put in your transcripts, you get your letters of recommendation, and you send the application out with your essay. And that is not true. There are more untraditional paths to getting into college or university. A lot of the unschoolers who had been fully unschooled all their life used community college as a stepping stone and started taking community college classes early, like at age 16, getting that college transcript and going from there.
Mm.
Other people called the program coordinator or advisor of the program they wanted to enter, explained their situation, and got in by college interview and portfolio.
Nice.
Other people called the admissions office and said, hey, I'm an untraditional learner. What types of options do I have? And I will say, I get calls all the time from the larger universities, the better universities, that want unschoolers because they know they have self-direction and they know their self-determination. And so I think it's always interesting when like Princeton or Yale, right, when I get calls from admissions officers saying, my gosh, where do we find these kids? Because they're amazing.
Mm.
So this is definitely, a new time in college admissions.
Mm.
College admissions now knows that there are more untraditional learners who may not learn in the traditional ways and who may not have that traditional transcript or, may not want to take standardized tests. And they're really opening up to more untraditional admissions ways. So there is more than one way to get into college. So
Perfect.
we know from that study that there is really very little risk there.
Yeah, it's just we're used to that, right? We only know that one
We
traditional way.
only know that one way. I mean, we do it in schools, right? We only know the one way, which is why, like post-COVID, when we're talking about reimagining education, it's so hard for people to get out of their boxes, right? They thought they reimagined it by putting things online, and now we know, well, maybe that's not really what reimagining is, right? Maybe it's a step further. And so that's really important to think about and to know.
Yeah. And one of the ways that they're proposing, we have it too in Canada too, as well as I've read some stuff in the US and stuff, is that the blended learning, right? Where
Yeah.
you like, um, do you think if a parent is thinking about, should I keep it in blending towards unschooling? What would be a better mix, or is it child specific?
Yeah, I mean, I think it really depends on what school looks like,
Mm.
right? And what a hybrid form will look like.
Mm.
I would love to see a hybrid form. If we're really going to do hybrid learning, something I'm writing about right now, I would love to see a hybrid form where if kids go to school 3 days a week, then the other 2 days they're in some sort of self-directed learning
Nice.
center or with a coach or a facilitator that can really work on like an independent or intrinsically motivated project. I would love to see that. And that's a way where we could really transform education as it is.
Mm.
There was a New York Times article this morning, actually, where a Brown University professor said something similar. Like, we want to see kids playing the 2 days a week in community centers, doing
Mm.
things that they love.
Yeah.
And that's how you do a good hybrid learning model. It's not going to work if you're just going to like be like, okay, there's one, Tuesdays and Thursdays you're online, and Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays you're in person, because
Mm.
a lot of kids don't have that self-direction, right? Online education is amazing. I study it. I have a totally online program. I love it. I've been involved in it for 20 years.
Mm.
But I will say that if students aren't intrinsically motivated or self-directed in there, then it's not going to work.
Yeah, it's a battle for parents too.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, yes, absolutely.
Yeah. Interesting time, right?
Interesting time. I mean, in my wildest dreams, did I not think that this would ever happen? And I don't think anyone ever did.
But we always hoped in the school system, as a, teacher and stuff, that it could be better. So
Yes.
my hope is that could it get better with this? That's
That is my hope, right? I once got asked in a news interview, like, do you think this can transform education? And I was like, oh my gosh, that would be my hope. My hope and my prayer would be that this whole thing would transform education as we know it, that we would move into a more intrinsically motivated, self-directed realm. Also, we have to think of societal changes, right? Because it's great that everyone's homeschooling because parents can work from home, but some parents aren't able to work from home and give their children the facilitation that they need. And so
mm,
we really have to think of it in a broader sense too, if we want to really transform things.
mm. You had a son who was homeschooled, right? Did you like, how does the idea of going to university comes? Because it's now a different, and when he does get there, or I don't know if he went or not, but if a child gets there, what about the standardized test there? Now they have to do that, right? They're
Yeah.
not gonna, like, how do they fit back into that again?
Yep.
Or
So I
yeah.
unschooled my son. He never went to school. His first day of school was his first day of college. And so that was interesting, right? And everyone's like, well, how is the transition? And he's written about it. He's written for Life Learning magazine about his experience. He wrote The Power of a Story about telling his experience. But he really said, the transition wasn't like as extreme as you thought, because college is a lot like homeschooling or unschooling. Finally, in college, you're taking the classes you want to. And of course, he had a liberal arts degree, so he had classes that he maybe didn't want to take. But in those classes, you learn how to learn. I think he would report that the biggest challenge for him were like the time management skills, which, I mean, one day you have no choice, right? Learn time management. The taking notes on things that were on the test instead of on things that he listened to. So when in unschooling, you're learning through life. You're not really seeing a direct teacher talk about things. You're actually doing things. And so
Mm,
that part of it was a big transition. So because here's a professor now lecturing, and you have to get the best parts of that lecture, right?
mm,
And sometimes write down what's on the test when really you're interested in a specific aspect of the lecture. So for him, it was the time management. It was the lecture part. He graduated with a 3.97. He was third in his class, and
nice.
now in graduate school. So, I mean, it wasn't as big a transition as anyone would think.
Yeah.
In terms of the testing, unschoolers learn how to learn. And so he was fine studying for his GREs on his own. Once he knew he wanted to go to grad school, he just did it on his own. He got the GRE prep book. Khan Academy was a fantastic help, as it always is, and just did it on his own because he knew how to do it, right? You know how to get to a goal that you want.
Mm.
And so, yeah, the kids are all right. I mean, these kids who have unschooled and have not gone to school, I know everyone worries, but I mean, Peter Gray and I think, are both here to tell you the kids are all right. They will be
Yes.
fine.
It's parents, right? We're parents, right? We
Yeah.
always have to
I
worry
mean,
about something or the other.
yes, I don't blame anyone. I think my parents personally, they come from my mother was a guidance counselor. She was an educator all her life. And so, when I was doing this, especially as a young single mother, this was like pretty risky.
Mm,
And so it was this big educational experiment that worked out. And I think it's just all about really trusting in the process,
yeah.
um, and trusting in the research.
Yes, for sure. One of the you just brought up another idea for me is that when you start homeschooling, other families or your their friends, would they judge you, or like, how does that?
The biggest criticism of unschooling, right? The number one challenge reported by other unschooling families was the judgment they felt by others. And that was, I mean, for me personally, that was so extremely challenging. And for my son personally, that
Yeah.
was so extremely challenging to have others say, well, what's wrong with you? You're not going to school. Like, what do you do all day?
Mm,
If others aren't doing it, with you, or if there's not a lot of unschoolers or homeschoolers around you, it can be very lonely and isolating,
mm,
because people are judgy. And
yeah.
when people see something different they don't know, they are a little wary of it.
Mm-hmm. And did that affect his socialization or having friends and?
Yeah, no, I mean, homeschoolers and unschoolers socialize in different ways, right? So, one of the benefits of socialization as a homeschooler or unschooler is age mixing. So,
Mm,
my son's friends didn't look like your average 13-year-old child's friends who would be all 13-year-olds, right? My son's friends spanned from maybe like 8 to 65, right? Like, he would make friends with people of all ages. He really didn't see like that, oh, okay, I'm only supposed to hang out with 12 and 13-year-olds. else, right? Like that wasn't in his head. And I think that's not in unschoolers' heads. Unschoolers are used to being in the real world where people are a variety of ages. And so socialization might look different. But we know that, the socialization issue is very, very much like people worry about it all the time. But unschoolers and homeschoolers have no problem with socialization. There is research to back that up. But again, the socialization might look different and might be more community based
Mhm.
than rather classroom based or like people of the same age.
Mhm. So if I started unschooling my son, for example, like I do know him, like I know his interests. So do I like push that path for him? Like do I provide a guidance to find it, or you just deschool and let him come up with it?
You do with whatever you're comfortable with as a parent, right? And I think that's important too. I think the important message that we learn from research as well is that there's a spectrum of unschooling. So on the one end of the spectrum is a more relaxed homeschooling where there's still guidance and where there's still facilitation, but it's a little less than if you were sitting down with a curriculum. And then on the way other end of the spectrum is what people call radical unschooling. And those are people who might not have rules at all for their kids and just, well, your day is your day. And so go do that. Dana Martin is a great example of someone who's been in media and who has radically unschooled.
Mhm.
So, I mean, again, there's no one right way to do it. And as a parent, you have to make the choice and do it in a way that you're comfortable with. I think once we start putting ourselves in boxes,
Mm.
right, that's where we get limited. But once we start taking ourselves out of boxes and doing what we feel works for our families, then you're in better shape because you're not worrying about anything else.
Mm. So if I do start unschooling, or another parent, what challenges do they should expect in the beginning? Because it's a transition. You should be expecting some challenges, right?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think the deschooling part is part of the challenge, right? You have to be
That's
okay with if your son wants to play a video game all day, what do you do with that? Right? If your son wants to play Legos all day, what do you do with that? And so the challenge is in that, the deschooling process. The challenge, of course, is in what other people will think of what you're doing. And you could say the whole time, I don't care what other people think, but really when society cares, you're like, oh gosh, this is hard.
yeah.
Also, of course, unschooling takes a lot of effort on behalf of the parent. There has to be a flexible job where people have to be
Mm.
home. There has to be someone watching this person. And so the limits to time, to income, do come into play. That
Mm.
being said, I don't want to scare people off. I unschooled as a poor, low income single mother for the first 11 years of my son's life.
Mm.
And it was probably the best time of our lives, I think. We
Mm.
really lived to learn. And we
Nice.
really, got to strengthen our relationship as a parent-child bond. And that has paid off tremendously as my child has grown into this really amazing adult.
Mm.
Is empathetic and caring and intelligent and loving. So, we can't forget the parental participation part in that, but we also have to know that I did it by going to school online, by working online, by doing all these things so I could be primarily at home with my son. But
Mm.
was it hard? It was hard.
Mhm.
But it was something that I wanted to do and something that most importantly, he would choose every year.
Yeah, yeah. It's you have to decide what you want and what is best for your family, right?
Exactly. It's all about what's best for your family.
Is there a time or any stories that you have where you're saying, like, there's addiction, right? Y- so what if I let my child play a video game through the deschooling and I can't get him back?
Yeah, yeah. No, I mean, it's so interesting. Peter Gray talked about this in his talk at Arrow, and he writes articles about this in his blog on Psychology Today.
Mhm.
We know that any kind of positive addiction, right, whether it's video games or addicted to TV or something like that, has an interesting element to it. People learn from it. So we
Mhm.
have a lot of individuals who are obsessed with video games that later become video game designers, later
Mhm.
become ed tech people, because
Mhm.
they know the world so intimately, right? And I always think that part of it is interesting.
Mhm.
For the last probably, gosh, 3 years between age maybe 14 to age 17, my son played guitar all day long. I mean,
Mhm.
he really did. He played guitar all day long. And at one point, I'm just like, oh gosh, as a parent, like, what is this going to turn into? Right. And it turned into a person who has a, master's almost in music theory. So that's what it turned into, right? He knows that fretboard so intimately. He loves the theory around the music and he knows that. So I
Mhm.
think we have to be balanced, but also not, knock things so easily. When someone is playing video games all day, sometimes that is a distraction, but other times it's really like, I know this world so much. And
Mhm.
you never know what that's going to turn into.
Mhm.
Peter Gray does a lot of work on it. And so if you're worried about video games, I would read Peter Gray's work on it because it's really
Awesome.
strong.
Awesome. You know, getting your kids, if they are stuck with the video game a little bit, or TV, or whatever we have to say, right? Is there, should the parents intervene, or just in the deschooling time, just let them
You know,
get bored of it, or if they want to be get bored of it, right?
so right. I mean, sometimes in that deschooling time, right? That deschooling time again is a time of transition.
Yeah.
We all know as adults, we know that there are times of productivity and there
Mm.
are times of rest and places where we have to like really just zone out.
Mhm.
And then we also know that that time of rest and zoning out leads to this amazing burst of creativity and energy when it ends. And so I think we have to respect that same process in kids. So
Mm.
if your kid is going through a period of deschooling, I think it's really normal for them to do something that they love and that distracts them all day for a while. Um, but if you're not comfortable with that as a parent, then that's something to think about too. I always say I never want parents to like be in a situation that they're not comfortable in. And so that's where,
Confused.
yeah, or confused. And so that's where the conversation part of it is really important, right?
Yeah.
Like, are you aware that you're doing this all day long? And what do you think, is this a time of rest for you? Is there something weighing on your head? Or do you see yourself in 6 months maybe doing something else? What do you
Mhm.
really see, and what do we want together, and how can we compromise and talk together and think of a way, maybe even if you do like a family activity per day, or even if we do something together, or it's all always, any relationship is a compromise, any relationship is a constant back and forth. So if you are in a deschooling mode, I mean, my advice would be just make sure you're talking to your kids all the time, right?
Yeah.
Make sure that you have that open line of communication. It might just be this period of like, I like to play video games because I want to be a video game designer, or it just might be this period of, I spent like 8 years in school and I'm really tired. Right?
Mhm.
And so I really need to de-stress, and this is how I de-stress. So it's the constant conversation that's important.
So, during the deschooling time, can I still enforce my house rules, like, or no?
You do whatever. Again, this is,
Yeah.
as a psychologist and as a researcher, I will say again, as a parent, you have to be comfortable with the situation that you are in. And so there
Perfect.
are no rules here, right?
Mm.
There's no like one way to unschool or deschool. There are no rules. And
Yeah.
so you, as the parent, get to provide a structure that everyone is comfortable with.
Mm.
It's important that we recognize deschooling, but it doesn't have to look like what we don't want it to look like if that's not what we're comfortable with.
Mm.
So
Mm.
I think it's really important. Again, the parent-child relationship is the strength of this movement,
Right.
right? It's the strength of home education and the success is seen. It's the strength of unschooling and the success is seen. And so that relationship has to move forward.
Yeah.
Most
Yeah.
importantly, you have to feel, good as a family.
family, yeah. Because we come from such a, traditional, our parents said, watching TV was the worst thing you could do. When you're young, you're wasting time.
Yeah, yeah. I came from such a traditional home, and I
Mhm.
still carry many values from that
Yeah, it's
traditional
here, right?
home. It's right here. It was the hardest time, right? For some of our unschooling journey, I thought in some way that I was betraying my parents, right?
Yeah, yeah,
And that was really hard for me as a
yeah,
person who did not want to betray anyone. And so I think that part of it is really just looking inward, examining your own specific thoughts and structures regarding school. And if you do decide to do something more self determined or self directed, to do things that you're comfortable with.
yeah, yeah. Like a lot of the viewers, like, watching this, feeling the same, right? Because that's what I feel like a lot too, even though I know the school system and I know, like, there's a better way to educate, right? And all of that. But still at the back of it, because we are so, those values, or your parent, what they gave you, those last lectures they gave you when you were young, it still come up. And,
It's so funny you said that. It stays with us forever.
yeah,
So one of the reasons I started researching and one of the reasons I started getting into the academic sector of this
yeah,
was because I wanted to provide people with some legitimacy. I
yeah.
wanted to be able to have an article or a book for people to give their parents or their grandparents saying, listen, this is what I'm doing, but it's backed by research,
Yeah.
right? And so things are going to be okay. It's one of the reasons I have a book coming out on September 15th called
Nice.
Unschooling, Exploring Learning Beyond the Classroom.
Nice.
And
Beautiful.
one of the reasons I wrote that book was it was the book I needed when I was 25 and making this choice. It was the
Choice.
book I wanted to give to my parents, right?
Perfect.
And I needed a professor at a traditional school of education to write it. And
Nice.
that ended up being me. And it's something that I'm so proud of. It's something that I hope that people will give their parents and their grandparents and say,
Yes.
listen, we're making this choice, but here's this book filled with academic research saying that this choice is reliable and valid and okay.
Yeah. 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 That's what a lot of parents are feeling like. What if I ruin my kid's future?
Yeah.
Because it's embedded in me that if I do all of this, if I let my child do whatever he wants and follow his interest, I mean, we were told we never even knew the interest was, right.
Yeah,
Like, how
yeah,
do you
no,
know
I
the
mean,
interest?
it's like no one would know. What did I like? I don't know. I liked whatever my parents told me I liked, right? Like,
Right?
yeah.
What interest? I mean, we tell you what your interests are, right? That's the kind of, mentality that our parents gave us, right? To be, but we're now seeking this. It's a change. It's beautiful change, right? That's why I love it. I want to be part of it, but there is this nagging voice behind you that could come in to play and then take over some. So I want parents to, that's why I'm asking you these questions, is I want them to know this is normal. We all feel it because it's in us. It's never going to leave us because, those childhood values are core part of you, right? It's going to take generation. Even my child might have some of it without me knowing it.
My child definitely does, and he was unschooled, right? He has that nagging, my parents were traditionally schooled. My husband, who I later married when my son was 11, was traditionally schooled. And so throughout his life, while unschooling, which is really hard, he was listening to voices that said, traditional school is the only way to go. And that is hard. It's hard to unschool while you have these nagging voices in your head. But if it's right for your family or your parent child unit or yourself, then you have to follow that, right?
Yeah.
And there's research backing it, and I think
Yeah.
that's
It's
where
very
the book comes in, and that's where our academic research on unschooling comes in. There's
perfect,
legitimate research backing it.
perfect timing. to settle a lot of minds, a lot of nagging
Yeah,
voices to
good.
settle
I
down.
hope so. Again, that was the book.
I believe
I
it.
wrote the book I needed as, a nervous 25-year-old making a
Per-
choice that was untraditional.
Yeah, yeah, because in social media and stuff, that's what got me going with this project is people need answers and people need to know, like parents need to know it's okay to feel. I feel the same way. If you're feeling it, there's thousands of parents feeling the exact same feeling, right? It's in.
Exactly. Yeah, yeah. And
Yeah.
we're hearing it. We're hearing, post COVID-19, we're hearing parents say, listen, I mean, this can't be the way to homeschool, right? Like looking at a computer all day. So what is next? And I think that
Mm.
unschooling is really the education of the future, and something that maybe in, if not 20 years, in 50 years, we're going to see self-directed learning really, really grow and be the education that our grandchildren and our great grandchildren receive.
Oh, yeah, beautiful world,
Yeah,
right? In
yeah,
education.
yeah.
You
I
know, go.
I hope
Uh,
for a beautiful world.
yeah, the self-directed is also something that employers, the future, if you were to go in the real world, that's what they're looking for, right?
We are a gig economy. We are a
Yeah.
self-directed economy. The way you survive is no longer being at the same company for 35 years,
Mm.
right? The way you survive is really through being an entrepreneur, through
Mm.
creating your own space in this world. And I mean, unschooling gives you great training to be an entrepreneur. In terms of STEM fields, we saw a lot of our grown unschoolers going into STEM fields because of the science technology background they automatically had
Mm.
through unschooling, which I think is so cool.
I want to also touch on quickly, that you said positive addiction is a form of the child showing you what they are internally motivated or interested in doing, isn't it?
Yeah,
It's connected,
yeah.
right?
I mean, when someone wants to spend all their time doing something, and when someone is so focused on spending all their time doing something, there's a message there, right? And so I think there is such thing as positive addiction. I think we see it in those of us who are workaholics and love our work so much that we work for, 8, 12, 10, 16 hours a day on things that we love. And there is no shame in that. That is, certainly positive. We're doing something for the world.
Yeah, yeah, and that's what parents have to remember. Like, when they're deschooling and stuff, is to tell, like, this is the time he's discovering, right?
Yeah.
It's a self-discovery almost, right?
It's one of two things, right? It's either a rest time where they're transitioning, or it's a time when they're going to like self-discover. And so it's just, either one is good. Either
Cool.
one is
And
good and positive.
yeah, and when did we ever give that time to us, right? We wish, right? I wish I had that when I was young.
Never.
Somebody would have given me discover yourself a little bit.
My son will often say, which I love when he says it, he'll often say, I wish I could go back to
Mm.
unschooling for just a moment, because I loved having that unlimited time to explore interests
Nice.
that was unencumbered by work and school and things like
Yeah.
that.
In my opinion, I keep saying I'll do it when I'm 60. You
Yeah.
know what I mean? That's how we were built. Go
Uh,
to school, get a
when I
get a job.
retire, yeah.
When I retire, I'll discover something. We have
Why
to.
are we doing things before we die, right? Like we like, and it's true, right? Like, why are we thinking, and this is our mindset, that we'll do everything we love when we retire?
Yeah.
And why not do everything we love when we're youthful and living and alive and healthy, right? Why not take that time to do everything we love and then retire and do some more of it?
Yeah, my mind is shifting as I speak to you.
Okay.
My mind,
I'm not in the business of shifting minds, but I
but
will say I
in a
will
way,
I love everything, and I love all choices, and there
yeah,
are benefits to all choices, but
yeah,
truly, I mean, there is some secret to intrinsically motivated self-directed learning.
yeah, beautiful. Yeah, part of learning. Yeah. So one of the work you do is with children with learning disabilities. When parents start working with them at home, if they're homeschooling, unschooling is a bit different. But would you say it's difficult if you have a learning difficult child?
Interestingly, we've seen, it's one of the studies I'm doing now, unschooling and special needs and kids with special needs. And I don't know, the research there is very interesting.
Mm,
So, number one, it depends on the type of need or disability we're talking about, right?
mm,
Some kids have more severe needs, some kids don't. Some kids have ADHD, which in Peter Gray's study tends to work really well within the home educated or unschooled environment. And some kids have more specific learning disabilities like dyslexia or dyscalculia or dysgraphia that might need some specific intervention.
mm,
So it really depends upon the specific kid. It really depends upon their needs. I will say that thus far, the home educators I have spoken to that have kids with special needs really feel very positive and confident regarding the fact that home education was a great choice for them.
mm,
Um, Other kids, again, might need more specific intervention. And as a special educator, I really do. I mean, I believe that there are kids that need more specific intervention.
mm,
That being said, most of the specific interventions kids need are one-on-one type interventions. So, for example, if you had a kid with dyslexia, and they needed like a more like Wilson or Orton Gillingham based phonics based program to learn to read, that
mm,
can be done in a home learning environment. That can be done in an unschooling environment,
right.
right? So all of these things are one-to-one interventions that can successfully be done. And of course, in most states, if you're home educating and your child needs an IEP, you can do both.
Mm,
So again, this field is ripe for research. It's one of the things I'm researching at the moment, but I will say I would feel very, very comfortable for an individual with special needs to be home educating or unschooling if that's what worked best for the family. And if
mm.
the kid was getting the intervention that they needed, I would feel super comfortable with that.
Yeah. And as you said, they will sometimes flourish better. Like,
Yeah.
I mean, it's,
Yes. I think, something I'm working on that goes with this research project is a project on healing through unschooling,
mm,
um, and having, healing through a self-directed learning environment. Some
mm,
emotional behavioral disorders that we see in schools disappear in a home learning or unschooling environment where people are unconditionally accepted.
mm,
Some forms of attention deficit disorder that you see in schools, as Peter Gray reports, might disappear in a home learning environment. So again, these are lifelong disability. Like ADHD is a lifelong neurobiological disability, but we do see a lot of healing happening for people who have chosen home ed and unschooling. And I look forward to more research on it because I
that would
think it's
be
a
great.
field ripe for exploring.
Yeah, yeah. When working at school, like with teachers with, 5, 6, 7 kids who are, who have learning on, unique learning abilities, right? We want to assist them, but it's impossible, right? Like, they're not getting it most of the time what they need, right? So it's just doesn't happen. So unschooling, homeschooling, you can give them the attention and
Yeah.
then foster the socialization. As you said, there's many ways to foster that, and now
Socialization doesn't just happen in school, and I think it's a really
myth.
important to point to hammer down, right?
Yeah,
Like
it's a myth.
we socialize within the world. It's not only in same age classrooms.
Yeah,
So when you're taking a walk, I mean, I know no one who takes a walk, even if they're in a rural area, that doesn't meet anyone while they're taking a walk, right? Or in activities, right? So many of our kids are involved in extracurricular activities and boys and girls clubs and 4-H and scouts and all of this, right? So I don't worry about the socialization issue. In terms of kids with special needs, that one-on-one environment, I mean, we know in traditional schooling that the one-on-one environment for kids with special needs really works in terms of intervention. And so I can only see that growing at home as well.
sure.
So yeah, there are things I don't worry about. Again, I look forward to more research on homeschoolers,
Yeah.
homeschoolers with special needs. But I also, the socialization thing, again, it is for me, it's a myth. I think for a lot of researchers, it's a myth because we've seen so many, we give you reference lists of so many research articles that say, this is not the problem. It might look differently from what you expect socialization to look like,
Yeah,
but we are not raising isolated children here.
yeah.
That's not an issue.
I think it stems from that core belief again. Like,
Yeah.
if you don't go to school, you're not going to have friends, right?
And
That's what they
that's,
told us.
my husband will say it, right? My husband will say the biggest beef that he had about homeschooling and unschooling was that, like, how do kids make friends if they don't go to school, right? And I think that for him, especially, and many, many parents, that belief has grown and changed as they see their child thriving in a home or unschooling environment.
Yeah, yeah. Like for me, like being 20 years, in the field of, directly working with students, I really, really think like I didn't have the research like you to back it up, but I was in the field noticing it
Yeah,
right
you were doing
there.
the
It's
work. You were doing
happening.
the work. That's more important than the research.
Happening, and I couldn't tell a lot of parents who had, special needs kids, that at school they're not getting what you could way better give at home, like because environment is a huge factor for these kids, right?
I mean, we talk about, right, from in a very formal perspective, we talk about least restrictive environment.
Yeah.
And the concept of least restrictive environment when we talk about special education. And the least restrictive environment is the environment where the student can be most successfully educated with their kids of general education, right, with their general ed peers. And the truth is that, I mean, home learning, what better place if you do it well to have the child grow up within a loved, inclusive, diverse community.
Mm,
And so, in specific situations where the family can provide that, home learning is the least restrictive environment for a student with special needs. But again, it depends on the kids. Some kids love the classroom of same age peers. And listen, I'm not knocking it. It's like instant
mm,
friends, right? Like, you're there. I mean, people invite their whole class to birthday parties. They don't have to worry
mhm.
about actually like interacting really. They can just have that whole classroom feel.
Yeah.
But if we're talking about true authentic friendship, that's something also we have to like discern, right? We have to discern the difference between socialization as having lots and lots of friends and lots of people around us versus true authentic social friendships and true authentic social experiences.
Yeah, very, very important. Thank you so much. This has been such a pleasure. One thing is to think about all of this thing, but then you did it when you were 25, and then you now went on to proving it and researching it and making sure that you had that validity to recommend or talk about it in a more bigger, better way, right? And look for that future with what our students really, really need, our kids really, really need, which is missing, I think. And that's what my sadness is when right?
I
It's like, how can I make it better?
Yes, it's all. I mean, I think that's all any of us ever want to do, right? I've never gotten out of the I want to change the world, and I'm sure you
Mm,
haven't either. Like, we all just want to change the world for better. How can we make things better and more beautiful? And self-directed learning is definitely something to look at.
yeah, yeah, beautifully said. I'm looking forward to your book, which
Thank
is in, I
you.
think, is just in time
Yeah,
for
just in
parents who are
time.
like
Just
confused.
in time.
Just in time when I'm confused about, with my old values versus the new world, what
Yes,
we need.
it's really, truly, yeah. It's available for pre-order. It's Unschooling, Exploring Learning Beyond the Classroom.
Perfect title.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you so much. You've been so wonderful.
Thank you. Thank you for all your advice.
Thank
Really,
you. You take care, and thank you for the work you're doing.
thank you.